Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Cross-Shaped Life, Taking on Christ's Humanity by Jeff Kennon. Narrated by George W. Sarris. Introduction. The cross is the test of everything which deserves to be called Christian. Jürgen Moltmann. Undertow is the current of water below the surface that moves in a different direction from the current on the surface itself. Though it can be dangerous, most undertows are mild and harmless. I used to live near the beach, and I would occasionally take either groups of kids — I was a youth minister at the time — or guests — it's amazing how many people come visit you when you live on the coast — to enjoy parts of Padre Island near Corpus Christi, Texas. It was during one of these excursions that I became aware of the influence of undertow. I was minding my own business, just enjoying some waves, when I looked up and realized I couldn't find the rest of my group back on the beach. Good news, they didn't leave me. Bad news, I had left them. There I was, savoring the coolness of the Gulf of Mexico during a hot summer day, while being whisked down the shoreline without even knowing it. That is, until I looked up and saw no one I knew. In case you're wondering, I did find my group again, but not without a long walk back up the beach. I have come to believe that we as Christ followers get caught in a different kind of undertow, one that can be dangerous. We go about our days being Christian and don't even realize that we are a lot further from what Christ calls us to be than we thought. The problem is that we just keep on being swept down the shoreline. For some, it's just a matter of busyness and being so caught up in the rat race that there's no time to look up and see where they're headed. I've discovered that this applies to not just individuals, but to churches as well. Churches often keep programs running without taking the time to think where they may lead. For others, it's a matter of forgetting. They know they have drifted, but they have forgotten where they originally started. So why not enjoy the ride and perhaps find something appealing along the way? Besides, there are so many people on this same path that it must be okay. We must not be swept away, however. This book is a call for us to look up and swim out from the undertow of our culture, along with much of the so-called Christian consumerism that is pushing us out to sea. We must grasp anew what God has created us to do and be. My hope and prayer is that by listening to this book, you will be awakened to life in God's image. You will discover wholeness and joy, and you will realize what it is to be truly human. But be warned, this path is countercultural and will be viewed by some as absurd. It is not a path for the weak of heart, and it is not the way of the American dream. It is the way of the cross. Returning to the cross. Not much written about the cross. Really. I found that hard to believe. Yet according to Fleming Rutledge, in her 2015 book, The Crucifixion, there has been no major study of the crucifixion specifically for pastors and lay students since John Stott's The Cross of Christ, published in 1986. But then Stott notes in The Cross of Christ, in view of the centrality of the cross of Christ, there has been no book on this topic written by an evangelical author for thoughtful individuals until 2 or 3 years ago, for nearly half a century. I find this all a bit disturbing. When the words of Jason Hood are added, it becomes alarming. Hood writes, "The biblical teaching on the imitation of the crucified Christ is the most neglected aspect of recent work on the New Testament message of the cross." These theologians could be overstating their case. In fact, I think they are, as James Cone, Greg Boyd, Michael Gorman, and Douglas John Hall come to mind, along with others who have written boldly about the cross. Have we listened to them? Perhaps not. Regardless of whether or not there is a gap in the literature about the cross, I feel we must continually return to the subject. What North American Christians today are most in need of contemplating and assimilating is a theology of the cross, laments Douglas John Hall. This book is an attempt to examine afresh the cross and how it forms our lives. We must examine the cross in its first-century context and let it speak to us in all its hideousness and humiliation. We must let it reveal to us the banality of evil. Most importantly, we must let the cross open our eyes to who God is and who we should be as a result. This will take some work, and not just academic work. Understanding the cross is not as simple as picking up a book such as this one, though I do believe picking up is a good start. We must let our picking up move us to contemplation and transformation. Our meditation on the cross must lead to a life that imitates the crucified Messiah. The cross is what we must live under. I dare write that the cross demands such a response because that is the only way we are truly going to understand it. Walter von Lohenich writes that a true grasp of the cross comes only in suffering experience. We only get it when we live it, and live it we must. Martin Luther wrote that we need to be worried when people become scholars through writing lots of books, but do not have the slightest idea what it means to be Christian. Reading this quote by Luther and writing this book at the same time have haunted me. Just the other day, a woman called our ministry office wanting some spiritual encouragement. We don't get many of these calls because we work with college students, and college students typically don't even know we have an office phone. When they need something, they text. So here was this woman on the phone waiting for me to pick up, and I was thinking, this is not part of my ministry assignment. But I picked up the phone anyway and began talking. And then it hit me. I had just been writing about sacrificial service to others, and yet here I was trying to figure out, is this person my neighbor? Chapter 6. I realized that I had been writing fairly persuasively about the need to humble ourselves and serve those around us in whatever form such service is necessary, but at that moment, the undertow almost sucked me under. Where we are headed. This book is the beginning of a journey. I intentionally write beginning here because I hope the journey doesn't end for you when you finish the last sentence. I hope you continue to discover and live out what it means to live a life of cruciformity. But for that to happen, we have to know the story of God. This is why we begin in Genesis. God has a plan, and it has not changed. His story is the story. And though we have abandoned the story, God has not. He still pursues. He rescues. He restores. And he does so to make us who we were originally meant to be, which is a people in his image, a people who reflect him. The heart of this book is to consider what it means to live in the image of a God who died on a cross. As crazy as this might sound, this is what it means to be human. Living cruciformly is where life is found. The undertow of our culture says we need to make much of ourselves. The cross says that true life is found only in self-denial. The undertow says that obedience to God is a bit enslaving. But the cross says that it's only in obedience that we become totally free. The undertow says you've arrived when you make it to the top. The cross says you've become great when you serve and give your life for others. We were made to live lives of humility, service, obedience, and sacrifice. It's those who live such lives who find their true identity, and as a result, change the world around them. Though there are plenty of passages of Scripture we could draw on to lead us into our discussion, the verses that are going to launch us toward living a cruciform life are Philippians chapter 2, verses 5 through 11. As I have continued to study and meditate on these verses, there appears to always be something new in them that grabs my mind and heart. I hope the same will be true for you. A couple of terms. Cruciform. This might be a new term for some. It simply means being in the shape of a cross. Michael Gorman, who has written fairly extensively on cruciformity, defines it as an ongoing pattern of living in Christ and of dying with Him that produces a Christ-like, cruciform person. Though there are those who prefer to use the term Christ-likeness or Christoformity, which is completely appropriate, for me, using the word cruciformity keeps the cross central in my thinking. It is the cross that draws me back to what I believe is at the heart of God, along with a set of lenses that helps one interpret all of Scripture. Human. I'm confident that this is not a new term for you, but I want to highlight human because this is what we were created to be. There are many books that speak of one's spiritual growth. We even ask one another, how are you doing spiritually? I know what we mean by such language, but I'm afraid that such spiritual language sometimes pushes us beyond the earthly life we are called to live. We are human. That is okay. In fact, it is more than okay. As God said, it is good. We are saved not to become more spiritual, but to become more human. Let's launch. This is for everyone. Leading a life of cruciformity is not just for the spiritually elite, whatever that means. It is for you. It is for me. It is a life designed for all humanity. It's what we were created for. It's what it means to follow Christ. It's where we find our identity. It might be easy to think that the idea of cruciformity, especially if it's a new word for you, is for the theologians with PhDs. But it's not. It's for all of us. Have I written that enough yet? It might also be easy to think that cruciformity is only for those involved in day-to-day vocational ministry, by which we mean pastors, missionaries, etc. Or perhaps we think it is for those leaders in the church who teach Bible studies and lead mission trips. Again, the answer is no. It's for all. It's for the everyday world in which you live, no matter how mundane or ordinary it may seem to you. In fact, a life of cruciformity most likely begins in your home. This is why, when we get to some specific applications of cruciform living, I mention things that appear to be routine. Perhaps they appear humbling as well. Maybe even beneath you. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. So launch out. Read. Embrace the life of cruciformity. And see where it leads you. Chapter 1. Our Roots. Our primary business in life is not business, or construction work, or sales, or teaching, or even motherhood, but becoming a complete human being. But what is that? Peter Kraft. What does it mean to be human? Scientifically, we are not that distinct in DNA from other animals. Yet we know we are different, right? And this difference is greater and surely means more, at least we hope so, than just being at the top of the animal food chain. So I ask again, what does it mean to be human? And how do we know when we have found the answer? For most of us, when we ask what it means to be human, what we really want to know is how we fit into the world. In other words, who am I? Why am I here? It's not just life after death that we worry about, but life after birth. The question of who am I is one we desire to ask, and you might say it's one we have to have answered. A cow is always simply a cow, writes theologian Jürgen Moltmann. It does not ask, what is a cow? Who am I? Only man asks such questions, and indeed, clearly has to ask them about himself and his being. This is his question. The problem for us is not in the asking, but in some of the answers we rely on. In 2015, according to the New York Times Magazine writer Wesley Morris, our wrestling match with who we are and what we are to become was at an all-time high. In Morris's appropriately titled article, "The Year We Obsessed Over Identity," he writes that 2015's headlines and cultural events have confronted us with the malleability of racial, gender, sexual, and reputational lines. Who do we think we are? For more than a decade, writes Morris, we've lived with personal technologies, video games and social media platforms that have helped us create alternate or auxiliary personae. We are also amid the ever-growing makeover shows in which a team of experts transforms your personal style, your home, your body, your spouse. But Morris writes that though our reinventions feel gleeful and liberating, and tied to an essentially American optimism, not all seems to be at peace. Something still seems to be wrong. Philosopher Daniel Klein's book, "Every Time I Find the Meaning of Life, They Change It," also speaks to our apparent lack of answers as to who we are. Klein's book is a composition of quotes he has acquired throughout his life that seek to explain the purpose of life. Though there are quotes from philosophers such as Epicurus and Friedrich Nietzsche, and from Solomon and Isaiah in the Old Testament, it is philosopher and theologian Reinhold Niebuhr's quote that wins the front cover. Why? Because Klein seems certain that any minute now they are going to change the meaning of life. Again, figure out the meaning of life. Who am I kidding? In the mid-1980s, The Breakfast Club was a hit movie. For some, it has become a classic. The movie is about 5 teenagers stuck in school detention on a Saturday. All they were to do for the 8 hours they were locked in the library was to sit and think about the error of their ways. No movement, no talking, no nothing. Just remain seated. Sounds like a fun day, doesn't it? This Saturday detention would be conducted a bit differently, however. For the sake of trying something new, Principal Vernon decided to give these students an assignment for the day. They were each to write an essay of no less than 1,000 words, answering the question, "Who do you think you are?" As the day unfolded, these students did everything but sit still, remain quiet, and write an essay. But in their raucous behavior, they discovered something about themselves. Though they were a diverse group coming from every sector found in the high school, in the end, they found they had quite a bit in common. This is what makes The Breakfast Club what it is. 5 teenagers, all from different social environments, stuck together on a Saturday, discovering they were all involved in the human struggle. The struggle to find out who they were in the midst of the pressure to be who others believed them to be and wished they were. At the end of the movie, only one essay was submitted to Principal Vernon. Dear Mr. Vernon, we accept the fact that we had to sacrifice a whole Saturday in detention for whatever it is that we did wrong. But we think you're crazy to make us write an essay telling you who we think we are. You see us as you want to see us, in the simplest terms and the most convenient definitions. But what we found out is that each one of us is a brain, and an athlete, and a basket case, a princess, and a criminal. Does that answer your question? Sincerely yours, The Breakfast Club. Our story of struggle. If there is one thing that unites us all together, it is that we are all in a battle of identity. And if there is one word that could be used to describe our human story, it would have to be struggle. Consider the Bible. Of the 1,189 chapters in the Bible, all except 4 of them, Genesis chapters 1 and 2 and Revelation chapters 21 and 22, tell a story in which something is amiss. All of human history, writes Philip Yancey, takes place somewhere between the first part of Genesis and the last part of Revelation. And everything in between comprises the struggle to regain what was lost. And what is lost? Well, we are. A most interesting study was done several years ago by the University of Virginia. In the study, it was concluded that men would rather experience electrical shock than be alone with their thoughts. That's right. A man would rather hurt himself than have to sit quietly with nothing to do but think. The experiment, which initially consisted of only college students, asked participants to sit alone with no technology between 6 and 15 minutes. The majority of participants reported feelings of unpleasantness. It was determined that people would much rather be doing something than nothing. But the researchers then began to wonder if one would prefer a negative activity over no activity. With all parameters the same, an option of experiencing an electric shock by pushing a button was added. A majority of men and a small number of women chose the shock. What makes this more intriguing is that all received a sample of the shock before the experiment and agreed that they would pay not to receive it again. And yet, when having to be alone with only their thoughts, being shocked was better than doing nothing. Apparently, we always have to be doing something. But why? Though some might think it's a new phenomenon due to today's technology, this is not necessarily true. Blaise Pascal, a French mathematician and Christian philosopher, wrote in the 1600s some ideas that could have been written last week. He believed that for humanity, the most difficult state in which we find ourselves is one in which we are at rest. When we have nothing to do but sit and think, we go crazy. Why? Because when we are alone with only our thoughts, we face our emptiness. We discover just how unfilled and bored we really are, which naturally leads to feelings of depression and despair. So, not desiring these negative feelings, we try to escape them. How do we do it? According to Pascal, we just stop thinking about them. Rather than face our anxious thoughts, we seek to put them out of our minds instead. But how do we just stop thinking about our emptiness, our lostness, our pain? This is not an easy thing to do. You cannot not think about something. We need a diversion. We have to distract ourselves. The only good thing for men, wrote Pascal, is to be diverted from thinking of what they are, either by some occupation that takes their mind off it, or by some novel and agreeable passion that keeps them busy. Instead of having to be alone and think about the mess we find ourselves in, we seek busyness and noise. We do whatever it takes to drown out the noise caused by the deep questions of life. Specifically, the question, who am I? Even if it means shocking ourselves. Our search. Our search to find who we are and what we are to become is a painstaking one. So where do we go from here? Is there any hope? I believe there is. In fact, I know there is. This is why our desire for significance exists. We were created with purpose. We should not minimize our longing to become more than we are. Instead, we should embrace it. The purpose of this book is to push us to become more of who God has made us to be. We are important to God and His creation. We are not an afterthought in God's mind and heart. Our problem is that our thirst for significance many times leads us to desert places. We drink up the sand, thinking it will satisfy. I think the subtitle of Jean Twenge's book, Generation Me, says it well. Why today's young Americans are more confident, assertive, entitled, and more miserable than ever before. We have everything we think we need, and yet it's not enough. We buy into the next fad or trending idea on social media, hoping that will make us enough. But it always seems to leave us hungering for yet another craze. It seems that the world we have created is not living up to the hype we have given it. This brings us back to our question: where do we go from here? Where should we search for what it means to be human? C.S. Lewis gave some good advice in A Preface to Paradise Lost. The first qualification for judging any piece of workmanship, from a corkscrew to a cathedral, is to know what it is, what it was intended to do, and how it is meant to be used. If this is the case, then we must start at the beginning. We must look at the story of creation in which God formed and created life and breathed into humanity the mandate of being in his image. It is in the beginning, in Genesis chapters 1 and 2, that we discover the reason for our existence, in light of also discovering our Creator. A Creator who is both good and holy, and who gracefully, mercifully, and happily made us and placed us on this earth. And as we will later see, a Creator who is willing to go to a cross and suffer for his creation that went awry. In the beginning. In the beginning, God. In the divine drama, God is center stage. It is his story. And it all begins with him. He is the initiator. He is both the author and the subject. It is from God that life becomes life. Without God, nothing would exist. It is God who set the earth on its foundations, so that it should never be moved. Psalm 104, verse 5. It is by the word of the Lord the heavens were made, and by the breath of his mouth all their host. He gathers the waters of the sea as a heap. He puts the deeps in storehouses. Let all the earth fear the Lord. Let all the inhabitants of the world stand in awe of him. For he spoke, and it came to be. He commanded, and it stood firm. Psalm 33, verses 6 through 9. In the New Testament, as the role of Christ is emphasized in creation, the gospel writer John declared all things were made through Jesus, and without him was not anything made that was made. John chapter 1, verse 3. Paul provided the same type of thought when he wrote to the church in Colossae, "For by Christ all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through him and for him." Colossians chapter 1, verse 16. And not only was everything created by Christ, but in him all things hold together. Colossians chapter 1, verse 17. It is God who is both creator and sustainer. And it is by faith that we understand that the universe was created by the Word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of things that are visible. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 3. In Genesis chapter 1, when God said, "Let there be light," verse 3, there was light. When God said, "Let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit," verse 11, it was so. When God said, "Let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth," verse 20, fish inhabited the sea, and fowl flew over the land. When God said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, livestock and creeping things and beasts of the earth," verse 24, the earth obeyed once again, and animal life was established, and God declared all things good. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness," verse 26.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?